You are attending the Scaling Your Startup, specifically in the mobility space, although we do have some non-mobility representation here as well. And so we'll get started. My name is Bill Mayer. I'm the Vice President of Entrepreneur Services with Ann Arbor Spark. Ann Arbor Spark is an economic development group in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And we work in the Southeast Michigan region to help grow the economy. And we do that through a few different ways. But enough about me. Why don't I start with Allison here to my left, who is a co-founder COO of May Mobility, an autonomous shuttle company. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So thank you very much for the intro. Allison Malik. So with May Mobility, we provide micro-transportation services leveraging the autonomous stack that my team has developed. I come at this from a background working in automotive, so I've been based in Michigan for over 10 years, working in the automotive sector, had an opportunity to work in corporate venture, so flew back and forth to San Francisco a lot. But then when we chose to launch May Mobility, we chose to actually launch it in Michigan because we think there's a lot of great talent.
So, Zephyr, you're with General Motors, and what's particularly interesting is the creation of Maven, the ride-sharing platform. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Zephyr Rizaki. I work in corporate strategy at General Motors. I helped to create Maven within the company. I spent most of my career in startups and in the tech space at Google. So bringing a lot of that culture and the willingness to move fast and fail was a bit of a learning curve within a large corporation like GM. But I think Maven has been an interesting proof point of how that can lead to innovation and how we can help change the mobility space even at a big company like GM.
All right, we're looking forward to learning more about that. So, Jasmine, you're with Duo Security, a recently valued above $1 billion unicorn, which is based in Ann Arbor, Michigan, but has a significant presence here in Austin, Texas. And your title is Recruiting Manager. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure. So I've been at Duo for about 3 years now. If you're not familiar, we are one of the fastest growing cybersecurity companies in the world. We are headquartered in Ann Arbor, Michigan, but we are seeing a lot of really great talent hiring in Austin. I started about 3 years ago. I was right around employee number 100. We've since grown to 650 employees around the world. I've hired about 200 of those folks, and we're on the up and up.
All right, great. And then last but not least, Paul Krutko, my CEO. Paul, you've had a pretty deep background in economic development before Ann Arbor leading a charge in San Jose to help grow that community. You've been in Ann Arbor for 7 years now, and over the last 7 years, the concept of mobility emerging, sort of above and beyond just the automotive heritage that Southeast Michigan has. Why don't you tell us a little bit about, your path from California to Michigan and what you've been seeing?
Well, the one thing I would say, just to start off, for those of you who are considering a place for your tech career, and once you want that salary to go a lot farther, I can speak from experience from 10 years in Silicon Valley. So my move to Ann Arbor, 3 times the house for 40% of the money, and a 15-minute commute. So that's just an unabashed commercial at the beginning of the difference between the two places. But yeah, mobility's a key area in terms of what we're focusing on at Spark. And the reason for that is that you should focus on the things that you have a strength in. And clearly the University of Michigan is a global leader in transportation research, is all over this topical area. And it also is a leader across the various technologies that are clustering together around mobility. It's not just the vehicle. Network security is absolutely going to be critical to this rollout of this technology. So we've taken a really aggressive stance to build assets to support early stage companies. And probably later we can talk about the American Center for Mobility, which is a redevelopment of an old GM plant into the nation's leading facility for connected and autonomous vehicle testing on an open source basis.
Great. So Allison, I want to start with you. So May Mobility, you've raised $11.5 million recently. You have pilots going in Florida and elsewhere. help us understand a little bit more about the founding of May Mobility and the path that you're on right now.
So the founding of May Mobility really came out of recognizing the dirty little secrets about autonomy that people don't like to talk about. With the work that I was doing previously, I was able to kind of see all of the work that needs to be done in sensors, all of the work that needs to be done in compute, but at the same time, there needs to be a focus on the customer, who is the rider, and how do you make sure that for this type of technology, there's a desire to adopt it and that you're solving real transportation problems. I think a lot of larger companies assume that the Lyft and Uber model is the right model to attack with autonomy. When you talk with cities, it's not. When you talk with riders that don't have cell phones, it's not. And so to provide a transportation system that can have the aim to impact everyone, that's really what we wanted to be able to do. So we recognize that autonomy for everywhere, all the time, everyone isn't quite there yet. So let's take what works today in robotics and let's match that to transportation needs. So you'll see from us that they are shorter distance, they're lower speed roads, but with a real effort to make sure that we're gaining rider trust. We're learning about the communities that we're launching in so we can grow with them. And we think that on top of learning what it means to operate this fleet is what's going to help us really come out ahead of the competition.
Great, thank you. So, Zephyr, you're with General Motors, an admittedly large company, and through the creation of Maven, General Motors is taking, sort of an approach to helping solve this mobility challenge. Could you tell us a little bit about Maven's specific strategy around mobility and also the whole process of corporate entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so when I joined the company about 3 years ago, there wasn't a clearly defined strategy around mobility. And that's part of what I and a small group of folks within the company were really focused on. And it actually really started with something Allison brought up, which is focusing on the user. I came in and led a ton of user research. We went to large urban city centers like New York City, even places like Ann Arbor, where there's a great city dynamic there, and really tried to understand what are the needs of a community, whether they are urbanites, whether they are busy moms, the elderly, and tried to think about what types of solutions we can build for those different demographics. Maven just ended up being the one that we could take to market the fastest, which was leveraging our strongest asset, the vehicle. We had a robust portfolio of vehicles, and we wanted to see how quickly we could deploy a system whereby people could access those cars differently. For 100 years, we've been designing, building, and selling great cars, but you have to go to a dealership, you have to pay a lot of money to get one, and that's not an equitable model for everyone. Could we build a model that was more accessible, that these busy people in New York City who can't afford a car but might just need one for an hour or a day can use a mobile app to quickly access? That was really the birth of Maven, and I think that started to open up our minds to asking a ton of other questions. How can we leverage that type of a platform to go into other service models like ride sharing? What does this look like as a stepping stone towards autonomous? And I think that actually accelerated. So right around the time Maven launched, we also made a number of other significant moves, like investing a lot of money in Lyft. We acquired another smaller rideshare company called Sidecar, and we also acquired an autonomous vehicle company, or an autonomous technology company called Cruise Automation, all within the span of a few weeks, actually. So it was a really busy time for us, and I like to think that Maven really helped to spur those conversations.
Very good. And Sidecar has a thread coming back to Ann Arbor, doesn't it?
Yeah, actually. One of Sidecar's co-founders is Adrian Fortino, who is a pretty active investor and entrepreneur in Ann Arbor.
Right, who's with Mercury Fund.
That's right.
Who has somewhat local roots, which has a presence in Michigan.
That's right.
So very interesting. So Jasmine, Duo Security, Unicorn, rapid growth. You've been there since the early years. Could you tell us how Duo has successfully scaled? How do you do it?
A lot of coffee. Yeah, so I think the the two biggest things that attribute to our growth are our values. So Doug Song, John Oberheid, our two co-founders, they built an incredible foundation, even just when Duo was just an idea. And they, you hear the buzzwords like culture and values and principles, but like, I kid you not, this is truly our DNA today. So fast forward, we've been around for 9 years now. I'll call out two of our values. Engineering the business is one of them. So we look for people, and our best employees are those that are always thinking in the way of what can I do right now in this moment to actually make Duo better? How can I make us, more lean, more efficient? We reward that actually, and we still to this day foster it and encourage it. Cross collaboration across teams. So I'll give an example of in my first year, I actually got to go to a marketing event. And my husband was like, why are you going to this? You're not hiring people there. But it was an opportunity for me to see how marketing operates and how they're interacting with our customers. And we actually adopted some of their ideas and one of their resources. The second value is continual learning. So a lot of you are probably thinking like, MBAs and tuition reimbursement. For us, this means real-time feedback. Retrospects. So we're a company still to this day that sits down and says, okay, how did that go? We made a mistake, we failed. How do we make sure we don't do that again? Celebrating our wins, kind of on the flip side. So we just won the biggest deal in company history. How do we do that again? And then the third thing probably is, sorry, I have to give a shout out to the recruiting team, but a lot of companies don't realize that's your front line, that's your gatekeepers. And if they're really rocking the culture and embracing the values that your founders or CEO or whatnot they've instilled, they're going to make sure that they're hiring people that have that as well. So our recruiting team, we have actually a little bit of a longer time to fill, despite the hyper growth, and it's because we've never settled. We've never said, just butts in seats. We have to get the right people who engineer the business, who continue to learn, and can be agile and nimble and make mistakes.
Great. And how big is your Austin office now?
About 130.
130. And the number in Ann Arbor?
300.
All
about
right.
300.
And you also have locations in London and San Francisco.
Yep, we've got about 70 in San Mateo and about 30 in London and about 75 folks that work remote for us.
All right, great. So your global presence is coming along nicely.
We are.
All right. So Paul, if you look at Michigan, if you look at Southeast Michigan, there's this century-long building of automotive infrastructure. The automotive cluster that's been present, and you've seen the rise of mobility, sort of as a layer above automotive, incorporating all kinds of different modalities of letting people move, getting things done. Could you talk about some of the assets that are present in Southeast Michigan and why a mobility startup should have Southeast Michigan on their radar?
Sure, I can do that. A couple things that are important to understand is we read in the media about different places in the world or in the country that are growing in this space, that Southeast Michigan still has a what I would call a predominant position. And why do I say that? Well, the data is pretty clear. 78% of all North American research in transportation, automotive, mobility happens in Southeast Michigan. The concentration of engineers per capita is the highest in the country. If I asked this audience, tell me what's the second largest concentration of IT people doing coding in the country, people might say Austin, they might say Boston, but the truth of the matter is in Southeast Michigan. And it comes from the fact that right now, a car is the most complicated device any of us interact with from a computing perspective. So what does that mean? Well, everybody focuses on the legacy companies that are very, very important there, GM, Ford, and Chrysler. But in Ann Arbor proper, Toyota has its North American research facility. So every vehicle that Toyota sells in North America is designed, tested, and validated in Ann Arbor. Hyundai Kia has a similar facility. So just from a standpoint of the talent pool that is already there and educational institutions that are feeding that talent pool, it's a really rich environment. That coupled with, as I already mentioned, just the fact that, and I'm not a grad, so this isn't the alum being proud of the University of Michigan. The University of Michigan is in the top 3 in the United States of research, funded research of any kind across all disciplines. And it leads colleges. I think the number is 11 of its colleges are the leading colleges in the United States. That creates a rich talent pool to draw from, and particular strengths, in terms of IT talent. Little known, Larry Page went to UM. The only part of Google that makes money is in Ann Arbor. That's the National AdWords shop. It's in Ann Arbor. So that's a key asset. But what the important thing, too, to know about assets is that we recognize that there's a tremendous change. Your future as a community is not foreordained. We go places around the world that once were the leading technology center, Florence, London, and maybe someday Silicon Valley. But the issue becomes you have to build on your legacy. So about 6 years ago, the University of Michigan made a decision to create the first in the world facility for connected and autonomous vehicle testing that wasn't company owned, and that was M-City, which was about a 40-acre facility right on campus. We took that idea and now opened in December is the nation's leading, as I mentioned already, open source facility, 350 acres with, right now we're doing highway speed testing with tunnels over existing roadways. So our testing environment, real vehicles are going through while we're testing vehicles with multiple layers of overpasses. And we will be building city environment that looks something like Los Angeles intersections for testing. Why is that important in terms of your scaling your startup? It's an environment that is open source, and we're looking to give early stage companies the chance to test and demonstrate their project on that site, our product on that site. And we now have our leading founders, to give you a sense of the open source environment, are Ford, Visteon, Toyota, Hyundai, Kia, AT&T, and others, which indicates to you that it is an open source environment because the coming mobility technologies are about collaboration, not individual companies. The individual companies are going to have to work with other technologies in other companies. So we think we have a rich environment. We know that our companies like Duo are going to seek out talent in other places to support this. And so we're really very much into that collaboration between communities so that the company can be overall have that success that they're looking for.
Yeah, it's a good point. This global perspective on how to really build a successful company as they scale. Thinking you're going to find everything in your front yard is a little myopic. So it's really interesting to see the level of collaboration. Zephyr, General Motors, you have the entrepreneurship of Maven, but for mobility companies out there that see the need to collaborate with large companies in order to successfully commercialize what they're working on, could you give any advice or how General Motors approaches working with startups and sort of growing mobility companies?
So at GM, we've got a number of different channels through which we interface with startups. We have a ventures arm that looks for strategic opportunities to invest, and so we have a growing portfolio of startups that we work with through that. We also recently started a collaboration with the Bay Area accelerator called 500 Startups, and so with every cohort that comes through 500, we will actually screen and select a handful that we will also strategically partner with, offer mentorship to, et cetera. And we are scaling up kind of our acquisition process and as we've demonstrated kind of over the past couple of years. So I think there are a number of different channels through which startups can interact with us. I'm constantly trying to push that envelope of collaboration, and that we can't do it all ourselves, and we have to be open to partnering with startups. They can move a lot faster than we can oftentimes. They find talent in places that we often don't. So I think it's really important for us as GM to also find that balance and keep startups on our radar.
And I realize you have a GM hat on. If you look at your compatriots around Southeast Michigan, you know, the automotive industry is arguably for good reason conservative about, you know, sort of rapid change. You don't typically, you know, just restart your car when it's locked up or, you know, having sensor issues, et cetera. Are you seeing a cultural shift really happening in the automotive industry that is, you know, making themselves more open to this model of innovation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our CEO, Mary Barra, acknowledges that there will be more change in this industry in the coming 5 years than we've seen in the past 50. And that's a reality of this space. I think ourselves and our compatriots see that as well. I mean, you look at Ford, and they are doing a lot of also sort of M&A and investment activity. They're opening up labs in Silicon Valley. They're really shifting things within their own corporate structure. And I think that's all towards this same vision of we need to be a different company to survive in the future. And that traditional model is not going to work. You know, vehicle sales are going to change. The way people want to access and use vehicles is going to change. So we really need to be aware of those upcoming changes and change the way we operate.
Great. That's a very encouraging answer. Allison, you're building a company from, you know, sort of a seed into a flourishing business. Can you talk about any of the challenges that you see for the mobility industry and specifically as you're scaling your company?
For the mobility industry in general, I think it really does come back to the collaboration. Having come out of auto and now into a startup, recognizing that there will be winners and there will be losers, but to assume that all of the winners need to be all of the nameplates that currently exist in their form as they do, creates the wrong kind of competitiveness. So you have auto companies that are good at building cars thinking that they're competing against other auto companies that are good at building cars, trying to compete in the mobility space. And I think that is not quite right if you're trying to work in mobility. And so I think there's a lot more opportunity for partnership and collaboration. To Zephyr's point, it takes a different approach. And that's something that I really wanted to be able to take on, and saw founding May Mobility as the best way to do that, to approach the problem in the way that I thought made the most sense. That said, in terms of challenges, the region has a lot of really great talent in safety and reliability engineers and engineers that do write code for the auto industry, but it needs more. And it needs more people that write code in different ways. And I think that that's something that we need to recognize. You see a lot of automakers and tier ones now opening up shop in Silicon Valley to take advantage of that talent. It's not bringing that talent and that culture back to Michigan. And that is something that we're trying to foster within May Mobility, which has been a great recruiting tool, especially within the state. But we've also been able to start to get people coming from Silicon Valley, coming from Boston, coming from Pittsburgh, and joining our company. And I think that that's exciting, but we can't be the only ones in the region that are focused on creating that culture within the state.
Could I just build on that real quick?
Please.
I think something that Allison said is really important. You know, it's really easy to think that because the Fords and the FCAs and the GMs of the world have been doing this for like 100 years and they've got a ton of capital and they've owned the industry, that they are going to be the ones to lead us into the future. We've seen this in other industries, right? The tech space, you know, you look at what has happened with Kodak, and you look at what's happened with you know, Xerox and others. They were the big dogs in the space, and or even like AOL, and you know, with Google coming into the space and really disrupting with technology and with new business models. The big players go away and the small players really have chances to grow and flourish. So, I mean, I think that's really encouraging for entrepreneurs in this space, that there is real opportunity because of this transitional period that we're in to come in and disrupt and even displace some of the larger players in the space.
Yeah, Bill, and just to kind of build on that's the approach that we've been trying to take at Spark in terms of leading the Ann Arbor region. The notion is that we want to create the new environment for companies to flourish that are going to grow up in this way. We clearly aren't looking to move away from our legacy. I mean, the fact is the companies like GM in terms of Maven or Ford in terms of Chariot and other initiatives recognize this themselves. But one of the things that they found is they kind of do need to get out of their current corporate location. So, for example, Ford Labs moved out of Dearborn and it put a presence right in downtown Ann Arbor because they wanted to be close to that talent pool and that energy. I think the other thing that is important for early stage companies to know about Ann Arbor in specific is we really are embracing the concept of a living laboratory. So the city is very interested. And it's a right-sized community. We've done demonstrations for NHTSA on safety pilots where lots of citizens agree to have technology installed in their vehicle. But the city embraces that notion, and many young companies need to demonstrate and test their technology in real live environments, and you can't just do that in a controlled setting. So one of the things that we would encourage anybody who's got an early stage company and is looking for a place where they want to demonstrate what they're doing and work collaboratively with a local government and a supportive tech environment is to consider us. You know, we didn't really mention that you know, your work is that we are running an accelerator much like the type of accelerator that was mentioned in Silicon Valley, where there are numbers of companies, you know, locally. So one of the things we want to encourage our big companies to look at is, hey, sometimes you don't look right outside your own door at the companies, early stage companies that are doing this work in Michigan, in Southeast Michigan. There's this notion, well, we have to go to the Valley. And you know, being there as I was for 10 years, you recognize when you're in the Valley, there are a lot of other places, much like the competition that was just described, that certain areas aren't going to be, certain companies may not be the main players, certain regions may not be the best players in the future. One of the things that we're paying attention to on talent recruitment is recent surveys in the Valley say 65% of the millennials that are working there want to leave. 48% of the people working in technology want to leave. They want to go someplace else where they can have a better quality of life but still have their career. So early stage companies need to be looking at a lot of places around the country which may provide a nurturing environment to them, not just default to Silicon Valley.
Just one more comment
Please.
to build on that. You use the term living laboratory, which I love. That's actually why we first launched Maven in Ann Arbor. Because of the relationships that we had with the city and with the university. You know, if you're a startup, having that environment where you can put your product in the world and test it with real users is really important. And that was actually kind of a foreign concept for GM. You know, I had to battle executives who wanted to go launch it in New York City with flashing lights and everything else. I said, no, you know, let's start small. Let's do it in our backyard. Let's do it with people who we can actually talk to and get feedback from. And you know, any startup would know this, right? It's very different from developing a technology in your laboratory and thinking that you're gonna build this thing and then go make $1 billion off of it. It's iterative, and you have to launch and iterate, be lean about it. And Ann Arbor was the perfect testing ground.
And
for
that
us
was
to do
Allison's point. Just building on that, you said a lot earlier in the talk here about you know, sort of the notion of the customer need, and the customer today can really be cities. There is the notion of what is going to be the operating platform for cities to be able to plug and play lots of different mobility technologies to really solve problems. I really liked your comment because I go to a lot of these conferences and you hear the company's got a technology, but it's kind of not connected to who the customer really is. And if you look at a lot of places, there's a lot of disadvantaged populations that really need mobility solutions. There are a lot of places where people the existing transit system cannot get them to the job. And if they use it, it might take them 3 hours to get to the job, right? So I think your point's really well expressed about the need to focus on the customer in this.
And I think the beauty of the region, you have Ann Arbor as a great living lab, but I got to give a shout out to my previous panel. Detroit has been also very supportive, so our company is based in Ann Arbor. We did our first pilot in the city of Detroit, and they have also been really supportive. So from having multiple options from test tracks to cities that you can work with, and I even was sold on Grand Rapids during that panel, I think that that's something that I've really enjoyed is as we scale our company, people ask, well, are you going to California? And the answer is yes, eventually. But there are so many other communities and so many other people that need this. And if you actually go about scaling your company, not focused on what your tech is, but what problems you're trying to solve, you realize there's a lot of hungry markets that you can go serve. And it's something that when you come at it from the point of view being in Michigan and kind of seeing how I will say more of the country lives, you can approach things differently, which I think is really exciting and opening a lot of doors for us.
Great. So Jasmine, I just wanted to talk about Duo for a moment. A component of our audience are going to be early stage companies that sort of look at Duo as a role model for what could we theoretically become. I imagine you've learned a lot of lessons as Duo has turned into a global operation. Could you share with us some of the things you've learned about how to build an organization?
Lots of coffee. I'm just kidding. Yeah, so when I think about some of the problems 3 years ago to what we're facing today, some of the underlying themes are still there, but they kind of evolve as you scale. Communication was probably the biggest lesson we learned of disseminating the right information to the right people or even just everybody. I'll give the example of moving to Austin. A couple of days before Christmas Eve, my COO walked up to me and he's like, "Why aren't our jobs posted in Austin?" And I'm like, "We're moving to Austin?" And he's like, "Yeah, like you didn't like that's something that maybe the recruiting team should probably know." So getting those people on board early that push that information through, or even just operational alignment. So that's something that we started. Our C team, our executive team started, was getting all of the leaders at the top together about what each department is doing, and then cascading that down so that we're all reaching towards the same goals. I think that operational alignment maybe could have started a little bit earlier, to be honest. And today we're facing just the pains of scale and still communicating cross-departmentally, but strategy, facilities, all these things that come along with hypergrowth. And when you get to this stage of certain teams growing faster than others and product to the market, I think we'll still have these problems in 3 years from now, but the themes, the underlying themes will still be there.
Good. And talent is one of these pervasive problems that's talked around, around the globe about not having enough computer science graduates and other, sort of talent and engineering that you need. How do you do it? It seems like you're able to find the people that you need.
I guess so, yes. The recruiters at the front lines, I'll just mention that again, being open to who the folks we're looking at. You talked a little, Zephyr talked about how, the talent that startups can find. It's not just, going after other startups. It's, there are a lot of folks at the GMs of the world that, could be super successful at Duo. So being open to what's not on paper, folks that are, high potential are really carry the values of, specific to your organization, bars, engineering the business, things like that. Being open about location, about remote, saying, there's a lot of people in Boulder or in Denver or Washington, D.C. even as we gear up to be successful in the federal market this year. So, I think the open-mindedness is really the best thing when you're looking to hire a lot of folks. And being fast with the interview process too is, does this person meet the needs of the job? And if the answer is yes, hire them. Don't wait for another interview 2 weeks later.
Okay, good. And do you ever find yourself meeting someone who's amazing and you don't have a position for them, but you hire
Every
them?
day.
And would you hire them anyway?
We've done that a lot, and my recruiting team would probably wince at that because it's painful. When we're working towards goals of hiring and headcount that exists and is true, and then we meet these amazing candidates, and we say we can't live without them, we need them. What do? Well, you roll it up to finance. Can we make this work? Do they truly meet the business need? If so, yes. And I actually do think that's helped us with hypergrowth is opportunistic hires, we call it, and kind of going against those headcount plans and saying we have to have these people. They're going to get us to the next level. It's super important.
Good. So thank you. I saw a graphic the other day that listed the sort of startup in every state that's raised the most amount of capital, and there was a big Duo logo across Michigan. Let's talk about access to capital for a moment. Allison, certainly you've been successful. Zephyr, you come from sort of an established organization, Duo. Can you give us, and anyone jump in, an assessment of your ability to raise capital in Michigan, and can you leave the company there?
You can raise capital in Michigan. I still don't think the terms are competitive. I'm just going to lay it out there. And I think you'll see that across a lot of the more successful startups. They may get one or two funds in. DVP and Ludlow have been great working with us and have been really great local partners. But the rest of the capital that we got was from Silicon Valley, from other OEMs, and just recognizing that the Michigan market from a capital perspective, although it may be more risky, and this is a little bit, I used to work in corporate venture, so I spend a lot of time thinking about this. The companies may seem more risky, but they're still competing on a national scale. So leveraging money from Silicon Valley back to Michigan isn't easy, but it's doable, and the best companies are doing it. And so if funds really want to participate in the hyper growth that's happening, they have to recognize that the connectivity of startups is changing, and more funds are willing to come out to board meetings in Michigan, especially when there's a case to stay there. For May Mobility, we did get asked, why not Silicon Valley? Our rent alone is like a tenth of what we would need, and we have a lot of space needs. We have cars, we have a lab, we have lots of engineers.
You're actually making things.
Yeah.
Things that are heavy.
We're making things, and we're able to hire locally for that talent. And so part of it goes to the CEO of the company around staying is being thoughtful about what resources you're going to take advantage of. They're there, and you have to be ready to just rattle them off to whatever investor wants to tell you that you need to leave. Even if you're an enterprise company, I'm sure Duo had a lot of success working with, there's tons of enterprises in the state. I think Fortune 500 companies between Illinois, Ohio, India, there's tons of opportunity, but it is on the CEO, the person that's pitching, to be able to explain that and why there's a good customer base. And in some cases, that may not be the truth, and a company may need to leave, but in a lot of cases, if you do your homework, the pitch can be made.
Yeah, Bill, and one of the things to share with the audience is that relative to venture capital in the state of Michigan, it is concentrated in Ann Arbor. There are 23 venture capital firms in Ann Arbor. Many of them are focused on how they can reach out to other funds around the country to have them join the raise that they're doing. And what's clear, and you've already highlighted it, is that many of the firms talk about the burn rate in Ann Arbor and in Michigan is much less than it is on the coasts, and it's just the basics. Comparable talent can be achieved at, say, 66 to 70% less, but for that talent, if you put that number into the cost of living index, what you then see is that money is going a lot farther for that individual person someplace else. And then it plays it out in terms of the business expenses for the company as well, that we're at a price point significantly less for the basic cost for rent and other things. So I think those are really important factors for people to think about. And I know your team and we have various capital resources that we can tap with the companies that we support. I think the other thing about our environment that's different for startups compared to some of the private sector startup entities that are out there is that we at Spark in accelerating companies, and I think you told me the other day you've got some 250 that we're working with this year.
In any given year,
In any given year. Is that we take a much more of a patient approach. We've had some companies that we've stuck with for 6, 7 years who then have turned into significant players in a number of clusters. And so it's a different approach that we take. We have resources that we put into the companies to help them along the way with grants. You know, you need a intellectual property attorney to help you. We're going to give you some granting funds to do that, so that you're not taking that out of your capital stack. And what that does is that, you know, in contrast to some other accelerator environments where it's like, hey, if you're not have an immediate success, you're out the door. It's a much more of a nurturing approach that we're taking, and that can really be helpful to some companies that may need a little more time to get going, right?
Okay, good. You know, I just wanted to take a moment and ask if anyone in the audience had any specific questions that they'd like to ask the panel. Please, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Well, first off, I have two kind of comments, if you'll bear with me on that, and then one question specifically for Zephyr. But first off, for the Ann Arbor guy, you know, I'm an old alum and have lived here 18 years, and I used to call this Ann Arbor on steroids, but we become, you know, don't make the mistakes that Austin's made as you look at regional development.
Yeah, our current city manager used to be deputy city manager here, and he says that to me every time I see him.
Yeah, so don't make those mistakes. Second point is you guys talked a little bit, there's, you know, kind of a mix of things about inequality and other things, and, you know, kind of this different transportation needs for different levels of people. I'd suggest I go out, and those of you who are interested in that, here in Austin we have this really interesting development, experiment really, called Community First. It's a micro-home community, getting people off of the streets. It's been incredibly successful. They have several hundred homes / trailers. It's kind of a combination thing, but if you can figure out a way to get out there while you're out here, it's in East Austin. I think it'd be kind of a interesting thing is they have unique transportation challenges. Could be an interesting Maven kind of customer because you have 200 people who have the ability to afford about 5 cars. Okay? And this is speaking from someone who's owned about 25 cars, but again, it's a little different. So now to the Maven, I have a question specifically. You're a little different beast than the two folks who are standalone. And you know, those standalone folks, and I've done 3 successful startups with exits, been a general partner in a venture firm. You know, people really think about these things. You don't think about PE ratios. That's post-public. What you think about are revenue multiples. And software has great revenue multiples. And frankly, I don't know Duo's model, if you're SaaS or, you know, cloud service or whatever. But, you know, it ranges from 4 to 16x. You know, hardware is a lot tougher. And I'm going to put, you know, capital-intensive businesses hardware is 1 to 3x, 1 to 4x if you're really good. You have to go and cannibalize your existing business. And I think General Motors does what, about 120 billion, 100 billion in revenues these days, and has a market cap of maybe 100 billion. You're somewhere in the 1 to 1.5x revenue multiple. Maven is a 4 or 5x revenue multiple business, but you got to cannibalize your current business to kind of get there. How does management support you in doing that?
So I can't speak to financial performance specifically, but you know, I think we look at Maven in a few different ways. You know, certainly as a revenue center, you know, we are able to generate revenue off of Maven services, but there are a couple of other strategic values that I think are much more important. Maven as a marketing platform to actually get butts in seats and experience General Motors vehicles, you know, especially if you think about key markets like New York, the Bay Area. Vehicle sales in those regions are, frankly, far less than they are in the Midwest. So for a college student or a young professional to check out a vehicle for a few hours and experience a Chevy Volt or a Cadillac ATS and say, wow, this is actually a really nice car, and when I'm ready to move into suburbia and I get married and I have kids, I'm actually going to consider a GM vehicle. We actually think that's a really important part of the Maven journey that our customers go on. Also, from a broader strategic play, I think the infrastructure and operations learnings that we get from running a business like Maven will prepare us for a future where we might be, say, running an autonomous ride-sharing service. And those are important aspects of that business that we can't look at purely on a revenue basis, but that are going to have a ton of value a year from now, 2 years from now, when we start getting into that type of business.
Still doesn't, that endpoint's great, but you got to get from where you are to there without the GM DNA killing you. Intel's been through this many times, and in the end, the processor business always kills any other innovative startup. You look at the Pentium business versus the Atom business. Pentium killed Atom.
Those are certainly battles that we have to fight every day within our core leadership, and making sure that everyone is really thinking about sort of collaboration and how we're making the most of that Maven business. So yes, we hear you loud and clear, and those conversations are happening internally. But I think our leadership definitely sees the role that Maven plays in kind of that strategic approach to our future. And so far, we've got great leadership support from the top down.
Great. Do we have any other questions from the audience?
First of all, thanks for asking such good questions and having such an honest conversation. So one of the things, having lived in Silicon Valley and San Francisco, that I really appreciated is the density of talent means that a lot of conversations just happen organically and then end up on the product roadmap. So how can you continue to foster these kind of conversations, not being in like one of these talent centers?
Well, I think one way that I could express that happens in Ann Arbor is that as opposed to other university towns who may have gone with the science park model, where you go outside and you build buildings and they're all isolated, and if you look at them now, they're all trying to bring food trucks out there to get that interaction to go on. What happened in Ann Arbor was this new model. Not being real wonky here, but the Brookings Institution has put out a study about this. It's about innovation districts. So we have 70 technology companies clustered in a downtown. And for the most part, they use the existing downtown environment, the restaurants, the bars, the social events that we have. We have a number of music events and other things like that as a way for that interaction to happen. So for communities like us, that becomes a better model to build that kind of, and it's really much more personal interaction, because even if you think about the Valley, it's a lot of science park types of environments, the little core downtowns, Palo Alto, Cupertino, those kind of places. You can have that interaction, but for the most part, they're big corporate research environments. And in a commercial way, what I should say is if you want to experience that in its totality, on June 16th, we have an event in Ann Arbor called Tech Trek. Those 70 companies open their doors. You can see the leads from Duo as an example. His doors are open and are a big supporter of it. And that way you can experience for yourself what that environment is. It's going to be a pretty cool week of activity. That day we do 10 of our companies do TED Talks in an old theater, and then you can, in the afternoon, go out and visit as many companies as you can possibly get in your dance card in a day. But to answer your question, that's the way to do it. You even see environments, the granddaddy of them all was Research Triangle Park. And they are rebuilding themselves by trying to bring in mixed-use environment into the park, because they know that the interaction between the talent is really an important creative mix. And if you isolate the companies, that interchange doesn't happen.
So,
Go ahead.
after you.
So one of the other things that I think, having spent a lot of time in the Valley, that people forget is that computer scientists don't always make the best products. And what's really interesting is that most of the artists that used to live in Silicon Valley and in New York are actually moving to Michigan. And so as we think about, it's not just computer scientists figuring out the next technology, it's thinking about what people need and what people want. In addition to having the highest number of researchers and engineers in Michigan, we actually have some of the highest numbers of product developers and more artists by the day. And when you look for creating something that's dynamic and really coming up with new cutting edge crazy ideas, you can't just leave it to technologists. And I think that that's something that is, when appropriately leveraged, is, I think when those things come.
5-minute warning.
Got it. Those things are going to take the world by storm if we leverage them correctly. So you see great things happening in Ann Arbor. You see great things happening in Detroit. The Detroit Creative Corridor Center just rebranded itself. It's actually, Detroit's now a UNESCO City of Design. And there's a lot more effort in Michigan to think about what products should be, not just from a tech perspective, but how people use them. There's a lot of those features that you need broader talents to come in, and that's something with the cost of living, there's a lot more diversity in Michigan.
Yeah, we should just real quick, for people who aren't from there, okay, so Ann Arbor is essentially, depends on the time of the day, 30 to 45 minutes from downtown Detroit. The airport is halfway in between. It is a global airport, so if you're a startup that's thinking about being global, you can get anywhere in the world from DTW. As a hub, and it's a great airport now.
So you may have seen me vigorously shaking my head while Allison was talking about, the question was asked around sort of concentration of talent and great ideas coming out of that. I think you have to reframe the conversation to having a real kind of design perspective, and I'm a big design geek. Design thinking, user-centered design, I think is critical to the success of a company. So as a corporate culture saying, we are going to go out and we are going to interface with our customers, we are going to go talk to people and understand what their problems are and ask the right questions, I think that's really what leads to a successful product. So being able to engage kind of at the city level, at the citizen level, in places like Ann Arbor, it's even at a place like Google, where they have processes around internally dog fooding their products and then piloting those products with small beta groups of customers. You can't just build something and expect it to be successful. It really takes going out and engaging your customer base and talking to them and learning from them. So, I think that's also something we're trying to push internally at General Motors, in trying to spin up these new ventures that are very customer-centric. And I think, some of our other successful startup family, they're all successful because I think they take these same approaches.
Yeah, that was the theme across all four of us, was a focus on the user and embedding yourself in the community. I think it was one of the first things you said was growing with the community. I mean, that's really the perfect way to get the conversation started.
Great. Well, as a moderator always loves, we've actually run out of time with a great conversation. Would anyone like to make any final comments? All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We appreciate you joining us this morning for this very interesting panel on scaling your startup. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you in Michigan.